Hello and welcome. I'm Elizabeth Edwards, Managing Partner at H Venture Partners, a venture capital firm that invests in next-generation iconic consumer brands. Venturing Out is a series that we've created where highly successful consumer executives and VCs talk about their experience investing in and advising startups. So if you're looking to diversify your portfolio, stay connected to your colleagues, and use your expertise and network as a force of good and growth, then this series is for you. And if you're a startup working to grow your brand, this is an opportunity to learn from some of the best leaders in consumer and venture capital. Today, I'm joined by Madeleine Ludlow. Madeleine is co-founder of H Venture Partners, and after decades as a Wall Street investment banker, she served as CFO of publicly traded Cinergy, a utility that was acquired by Duke Energy, and then co-founded West Capital, which served as the venture arm of Fifth Third Bank. She has extensive financial and investing background. Welcome, Madeleine.
Thank you.
Well, so Madeleine, thank you so much for joining us. We've known each other for over 10 years now. Worked together at West Capital starting back in 2011, where you taught me everything that I know now about venture capital investing. And I would love for you to tell us a little bit more about your background, your role, your roles, your strengths, and how you got to where you are today.
Thank you. Let me start. You sort of ran through it, but let me put a little flavor on it. As you said, I started my career on Wall Street at Morgan Stanley in investment banking. After my son was born, I did something that was considered a big risk at the time, and I moved from investment banking to the corporate side and went to work for an electric utility in New Jersey. From there, I was recruited to Cincinnati to become the chief financial officer of Cinergy, which at the time was a Fortune 200 company. And it was a great experience. It was a great company, and it's now obviously part of Duke Energy. And I have been in Cincinnati ever since, which I find hard to believe. After Cinergy, I ran a startup, a venture-backed startup that was co-founded by Cinergy. And after that, I started my own investment banking firm, and eventually in 2011, co-founded a venture firm called West Capital, as you said. That's where Elizabeth and I met. The firm is dormant, and when Elizabeth asked me to join H Ventures, I jumped at the chance. So I have very much moved from the corporate side of the world to the startup side of the world over my career.
And that is so cool. You've really touched on so many different types of environments, starting with, Wall Street in the 1980s, being an investment banker. One of my favorite movies, by the way, and every time I see it, I think of you, is Baby Boom with Diane Keaton. So, my mom and I would binge watch that movie, that along with When Harry Met Sally. Now thinking back, I'm thinking it's probably not appropriate for a 7-year-old, but I loved that movie. So inspiring. Being on Wall Street in the 1980s as a woman, I think, shoulder pads and misogyny, but what was it like to be one of the first women in a really male-dominated sector?
And besides the shoulder pads and the misogyny, we had floppy bow ties that we wore every day.
Right.
So we dressed like men, but we were women. Well, there's no question that in the 80s, there were very few women in investment banking. And while they were beginning to recruit more women, of course, it's a long career path. And so from a senior standpoint, there were very few women at the firm. I remember being told there were certain jobs I couldn't have because I was at that age where I might get pregnant, be inappropriate for a woman to represent Morgan Stanley if she was pregnant. I will say, though, that things certainly got better over the 80s. And there was a lot more understanding and appreciation of what needed to be done to fully integrate women into the firm. And it wasn't all bad. I mean, I learned a tremendous amount. It was a really exciting time to be on Wall Street. I did big, huge billion-dollar deals. I had some incredible mentors. I learned a lot about financial discipline and about transactions, and a lot of that is still what I bring to the table with a place like H Ventures. So when I left Wall Street, I went to the utility industry, and I will tell you that that was more male dominated, probably even than Wall Street.
Well, so then you became, after you came to Cincinnati, you became CFO of Cinergy. You actually became CEO of a startup that was co-founded by Cinergy, venture-backed, right. Which, now looking back, I can't remember, that was what, 99, 2000, yes. How many venture-backed firms had a female CEO? Tell us a little bit more about your VC experience, what it was like going from being a CFO of a big publicly traded company to CEO of a startup.
Well, it's interesting because when I was CFO at Cinergy, I was actively involved in bringing venture capital in to fund Cadence, because the utilities that originally founded it, they didn't have the guts to continue to put money into it. And of course, it was the middle of the dot-com bubble. And I sort of got the bug. It was really exciting to go out and find this venture capital. And we raised $15 million. And I got to know the VC firm and the principals quite well, and they came and knocked on my door not too long after we took the money and asked me whether or not I was willing to come in and be the CEO of Cadence. Now, when I joined Cadence, let me just say that it was the beginning of the end of the dot-com bubble. We had raised $15 million. We were burning $1.5 million a month, and our revenue was $125,000 a month. And we had about 125 people. But, over the time of 2000, and then particularly through 2001 and up to 9/11, the venture money was drying up. People weren't willing to accept these burn rates that we had. I ended up my first year there laying off 100 of the 125 people that I had in the firm. Now, that was not fun, but I learned a lot, and I learned a lot about what it means to run a startup firm. I learned a lot about cash management. When you're at a place like Cinergy, you don't worry about where the money comes to pay the payroll, because all those utility customers are sending you a check every month. And when you're at a big company, it's not something you worry about. We worried every 2 weeks about making payroll. Mm. But as hard as it was, I decided I really liked it. It was so much more satisfying for me to be in a small company. And I think back to we talk about women, and again, things have changed so much over the last 40 years since I started working. But it was a lot easier to make your way as a woman when you were in a small company as opposed to a big one at that point in time. So I loved it.
I feel like I've seen a lot of entrepreneurs, now being an investor in startup companies over 15 years, go through that shift of, you go through the pain before you can really experience the skill, the pain of learning, the pain of, trying to make payroll, raise money, convince others to join you and to take the same kind of risk. And it's kind of like pain before you ever get to enjoy, any part of like proof points, and it's working and we're scaling and it's great. Yeah. So you continued in the entrepreneurial vein though, because then you started West Capital and really had a great team. I would say when I think about teams with complementary skill sets, West Capital definitely comes to mind. Mark being so, idea driven and very much a networker, and you are very pragmatic, process driven. You kind of talked about that, Morgan Stanley transactional discipline. I'd love to talk about the triage scorecard that we developed there at West Capital that's really become the cornerstone of our investment process, and some of the rules that went into that scorecard and how they were developed.
when you think about it, West Capital was founded to advise Fifth Third on doing venture investing. So it goes probably without saying that when you're representing a bank, they're very disciplined, they're very process oriented, they're very documentation oriented. And one of the most important documents we developed on behalf of Fifth Third was what we called a triage scorecard. And it's basically one page, and it's got 10 different criteria on it. And it gives you essentially a roadmap to spending the first half hour that you're going to spend with a company that you might potentially want to invest in. And it makes sure that if Elizabeth's using it, if I'm using it, if somebody else is using it, we're asking the same questions. We're kind of grading and scoring it, and assuming that the questions are answered and we get a high enough score, then we decide to continue to pursue it. One of the interesting things, and obviously we changed the scorecard from West Capital to H Ventures, because in H Ventures we're looking at consumer products as opposed to technology. But the first two criteria are still the same. The number one criteria and the highest ranked criteria of all the questions that we ask a startup relates to their management team, their experience, what they've done. And the number two criteria is related to the product as opposed and what it is that they're developing or selling. And we found this to be true across almost every investment that we made at West Capital. And I know it's going to be true at H Ventures. A great management team can take a less than great product and make a very successful company. A great product with a management team that can't take it the next level will not be as successful. So always we look first and foremost to the management team as we do it. And again, as I said, it gives us a consistent way of screening companies. It lets us screen a lot of companies, which we do, sometimes 20 a week, to make sure, and it brings to the top, bubbles to the top, the ones that will fit the best.
Yeah, I agree. And it's amazing because we can get through it in 30 minutes.
30 minutes, absolutely, yep.
You can hit on all the important things. And it is cool to see how some of the most, enduring principles, like you said about management team, where I think of Bill.com as an example. If we weighted deal terms as the most important thing, Bill.com would not have been an investment. And look, it was, IPO runaway success. And it really goes back to that management team. So it's a great tool. Well, you have tried to retire multiple times. I put that in quotations. What advice would you give to those that are approaching quote unquote retirement? I mean, how have you stayed involved and connected, continuing to use your strengths, your skills to really, be a force of good?
Right. That's a great question. And I'm going to preface this by saying that, a lot of my peers and a lot of the people you're talking about, or that hopefully are going to watch this, we were at a point where we didn't need to continue to work from a financial standpoint. We really would be at a point where we could retire. And retirement, in my mind, is really defined by you could really not work if you didn't really want to. And there are plenty of people who think the right answer to retirement is to get out on the golf course. And that's great for them. But as far as I was concerned, I wanted to keep engaged. I wanted to keep doing what I was doing in some way or another. And I advise a lot of people who are trying to figure out, what do I do in retirement, to start to look at the world of early stage investing. If it's, becoming an investor in H Ventures and then having an opportunity to see these companies that you could potentially help, whether there are other ways that you want to get involved, it is a wonderful way to take so many years of experience that we all have and give it back to these new companies and these new leaders, and really to help them figure out where they're going. And I think H Ventures is a great way to do it because, one, you have a financial stake in it, which is hopefully we're all going to be rich from this, right? But second of all, they're exciting companies, and they're companies that people know and can sort of, a lot of them are facing the same issues, and they're all facing them for the first time. And so bringing people into the fold who have the experience, have faced those issues already, is a really great way to stay involved.
It is really powerful for the companies too, because one thing that I've seen, I remember when we were bringing Jeff and Tom and Alex to Cerebelli, our baby food company, to talk about retail strategy. And those three, each of them have more experience in retail strategy and making brands a real success at major retailers. They have more experience in their pinky finger, than this entire team combined, just kind of starting out with launching this brand. And I remember the CEO of Cerebelli saying to Jeff and Tom and Alex, just that it meant so much that each of them were not only giving an hour that day to weigh in on some of these, key strategic decisions, but she also knew that they were all personally invested through H Venture Partners. They were all personally invested in a big way in the brand. So there's like a bit of the, skin in the game. It's not just a name on a PowerPoint slide. It's actual, dollars are invested, advice is being given, and these companies really do value that a lot. And also, I think what's cool is that, all of those folks that I just mentioned are pretty unique in the VC space. You don't see very many of them, which is pretty neat. Well, on that point, you are always the first to point out that you don't have a consumer background. Here you are, you're on the investment committee of a consumer venture fund, but you have an investing background. So it's always cool to see the discussion as we bring things to investment committee, how people weigh in, your feedback versus Jim's versus Mel's or Wendy's. Can you talk a little bit about the difference in working in this, consumer-focused venture capital environment versus maybe other investing environments that you've worked in?
I'd love to. Let me start by saying that, Elizabeth, you have surrounded yourself with an incredible team of people. Obviously the former P&G execs and former Kroger execs, and you can see, all of their skill set, but bringing in Wendy, who's got fund-to-fund experience. She's got a really different, she has a venture startup experience, but it's different than mine. Mine was more sort of doing the transactions. Hers is more sort of strategic. And so I don't know that I would have been all that comfortable if I didn't really appreciate, I certainly wouldn't have been, I certainly can't give you advice on the consumer product side of it. That being said, so I feel really good about the team that's there. At West Capital, we made some awesome investments. Obviously, we invested in Bill.com. If you still hold it today and you invested early on, you've made about 30x your money. So, but you can't go to a cocktail party and talk about, I'm invested in Bill.com. That's not what I really love. And what I think people love when they're looking at this is that they're going to invest in things that they can go in and see on the shelves at Kroger. They're going to invest in things that they can talk about a baby food company that's, formulated for brain growth, or talk about, we just invested in a new technology for incontinence. That's not cocktail party conversation, but it's something that's relevant to people right now. And so I think that's fun and interesting. But I think the other thing that's really important is we have such a huge advantage because there are so few people really focusing on this space. And, when Mark and I were doing West Capital, we were generally investing with people who were on one coast or another. And that's sort of where those deals came from. We happened to have that network and that worked. But, for H Ventures, I love the fact that, we have great relationships with our competitors who are also investing in this space. But I think the opportunities in the space are huge. So it's really been fun.
Yeah. Oh, I couldn't agree more. It is. It's interesting to see the consumer companies are not necessarily just coastal, and definitely over the past 15 years, if I look, across over now 30 companies, most of them have been coastal, but now with, looking across our deal flows, very specific in this consumer sector, you see Toronto, Chicago, St. Louis, Miami. It's just, it really is, a pretty neat cross-section of North America. Well, I really appreciate you sharing your insights with us, Madeleine. Your story is incredible. Your expertise that you continue to share with us and our portfolio companies is invaluable. And I hope that everyone has enjoyed hearing this episode of Venturing Out. And to all of you who have watched, you can help support our mission by sharing this episode with your networks. And if you want to check us out online and learn more about H Venture Partners, you can visit our website, www.h.ventures. Madeleine, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you. My pleasure.